Hi guys, in this video we're going to go through a buyer's guide, I guess, a few of my thoughts and things like that on buying a second-hand plane. In front of you we've got a selection, some of my planes, some of the students' planes here at the kind of school. Yeah, let's kind of start from the biggest one, I guess. This is a Stanley number 8. So this is more of a jointing kind of plane. It's huge. You can see the size of this thing. So how many times, I mean, I've been a furniture maker before I started the school here as a tutor. I was making furniture full-time for like 20 years. I must have used this about 10 or 15 times, something like that. Not very often at all. Not for jointing timber necessarily, sometimes mainly for shooting veneer. Shooting veneer is when you're jointing veneer by hand and you're kind of planing, the plane is kind of on its side and you're kind of planing things. Later when I do like a veneering kind of video, you'll understand why I use this. Sometimes you can't always use machines to do stuff like that, so a tool like this gets used. So this is not one that everyone's going to need, obviously, and yeah, buying an old one that is in very good condition is quite kind of hard to find, but looks kind of cool because it's a nice big plane. Next one down is a number 7. That like the numbering system, kind of how it works. It's a bit weird, but you'll kind of get used to it. We don't have a number 1 here, but you can get a number 1. A number 1 is like really, really tiny. I've only seen a few of them. I don't see the need for one necessarily because like a block plane will kind of replace that. If you want to know some of the tools we have got a tool list here at the school. If you want to see that, have a look at, I'll try and put a link for the video that we've got on that if you're interested in the tools. So yeah, there's a number 1. I don't know every single plane. There are so many different planes. So I'm not going to go through all of them. These are going to be the more common ones, and then I'll discuss the one that I would recommend kind of buying. So number 8, big old thing, jointing plane. Number 7, slightly shorter than that. I think this one is this one's a Stanley. I'm not sure on the kind of the make of this one. It's a cheap one, I think. It's a Faithful. Just I think a tiny bit narrower from memory. So a bit shorter, a bit narrower. Number 6 is the next one. This one is a Record. Could be a Stanley. Record and Stanley, they use the same numbering system pretty much. So this is a number 6. When I started my apprenticeship, I did use a number 6 for quite a long time. It's okay, but it's quite heavy. It's quite a hefty kind of plane. It's quite nice. It's quite long. You know, it's nice and wide. But I used it for quite a long time, and then I started using it's a Record again, a Record 5.5. Which is, you can see the kind of size comparison. 6 is just a tiny bit long, well, say a tiny bit, you know, a couple of inches or, you know, 80 millimeters, whatever it is, kind of longer. But this one's more lightweight. Same width, I think, almost good as damn it. Yep, exactly the same kind of width. But I just preferred kind of this plane. So this one kind of gathered dust in my toolbox. And then eventually I passed it down to another apprentice who kind of didn't have a plane. So I kept this one and then gave the other one kind of away. Didn't need it anymore. Because you don't really need a 5 and a 6, to be honest. You don't need a range of all of them. You only need kind of 1 or 2. I've got the 5.5 and the 8 and block plane and the low angle plane and some more specialist kind of planes. So 5.5. Then next to that, sometimes where we have students here on like weekend classes and week classes as well, and if they're either elderly or they're not very strong, then sometimes the 5.5 can be a bit heavy for them. So there are other choices. There is a 5, which is narrower. It's a little bit lighter. This is it's a Chinese kind of rip-off of the Lie-Nielsen. So I think it's Quangsheng. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a Chinese rip-off. That's my opinion anyway, of the Lie-Nielsen kind of planes. So yeah, it's okay. For the school, we can't afford to, it's a brand new plane. This was a new plane to us. So we can't afford, or can't afford it. Well, yeah, we can't. We can't afford, you know, 10 Lie-Nielsen planes. That's very, very expensive. We'd like to do that, of course we would, but we can't afford to do that. So we had to buy these as an alternative, and they're about half the price, if not kind of less. So they're okay, they do the job, but they're just not quite as good as the kind of Lie-Nielsens. But they clearly are more expensive than these, but I'll go through that in a bit more detail now. So yeah, 5.5 is narrower and a little bit shorter, but clearly kind of lighter than this one. After that, a very, very common, this is probably the most common plane you'll ever see at kind of car boot sales, you know, antique stores or whatever it may be, that this is the one that you'll find. This is actually this one is a number 4. So it's a Stanley Bailey number 4. And again, I'll go through which ones I kind of recommend and which ones I won't. That it's a number 4, and there's also a 4.5. The 4.5, again, I think it's like slightly longer and slightly wider. The number 4's okay, but this is more of a smoothing plane. If you're looking to plane timber down, which most of us are, then you want one that is a little bit longer, in my opinion, anyway. So, breaking down, it's that, you know, yes, you can buy kind of one of these, but like I said, if you're trying to plane timber, then you probably want that's a bit longer. So that's my opinion, that I would either buy the number 5 or the 5.5. For me, I like the 5.5, and this plane here I've purchased recently. I mentioned this in one of my other videos. I bought this one because the one I have already kind of tuned it up. It's got a different blade in it. It's got all this stuff in it. So I thought I'd buy this so I can teach you guys like how to tune and prepare your planes essentially, and what to kind of look out for. So I just bought this from eBay. It was on a buy it now price for £75, and I just sent or accepting offers. I sent an offer for £60 and it was accepted, and then there was a bit of shipping kind of on top. So I think, yeah, there was a 75 in total, so with shipping, which is not bad. And I've gone for, it's a record, and this is quite an old one as well. I think it's like 1930s, this one here. I knew that because I already had a plane very similar to this. This one comes with rosewood handles. Yeah, so I knew that that kind of time period came with kind of rosewood handles. Like the Stanley, I think this one's that's a Stanley Bailey. The Bailey kind of version of Stanley, they're quite nice. It's quite old, I guess. I wouldn't buy a kind of like 1950s and onwards Stanley or record. You know what I mean? I would stick with kind of the older ones, but the older they are, you know, not to say they're better. Sometimes the casting and stuff was better. But for me, that you've got to look out for clearly the big pitfalls, and that's what I'll go through kind of now. So what I look for in the kind of pictures were that not much rust. Rust is clearly, I'd say, I've kind of looked through a lot, and I'll show you some kind of images of my plane kind of now, or I'll kind of put them on the kind of side here so you can see that, you know, I looked at the images and they looked fine. Like it was kind of broken down. Let me just kind of disassemble some of this for you so you can see. You always want in the pictures, you want to see as many pictures as possible. You want to see the condition. Let me just undo the blade. Let's get this out of the way. Like, I knew the blade wasn't going to be flat, but that's just kind of part of it. But what I could see in the picture was the condition of the plane, and I'll show you that in a minute. I saw the blade, like the top of the blade and the underside of the blade. I could see that it hadn't been completely mangled by someone, because you don't know who's used it before you. They could have rounded over the edges. They could have really done something nasty to this, and you're going to have to buy another blade. And if you buy another blade, you're going to buy a new one or another second-hand one, and again, that's a cost. That could cost you half of what you could spend £30 or £40 on a new blade. You can get replacement blades for these. Ron Hock, he sells blades. He's in the States. He sells replacement blades. I mean, they're excellent. I have one of those for my version of this. But this one here, clearly it's the original blade. It's a tungsten steel one. They're okay, you know what I mean? It's fit for purpose, but at least that was like, I'm all in at £75, and I haven't had to then go and buy a blade for it, so it's a good thing to look out for, that the blade's in okay condition. The underside, this side, there's a bevel on the top, that's the underside of it, and you've got to see that that's fairly flat. But in another video, I'm going to go through flattening things. Flattening the underside of this and flattening the underside of this as well. So that'll be a separate video, so watch out for that. And if you're watching this and it's been out for a long time, then I have made that video ready. And see, link in description, all that kind of stuff. So, condition of the blade, the chip breaker, well, as long as this isn't covered in rust, this one should be okay. All it needs to be is kind of flat along the kind of the edge kind of here. But again, it's something you can tune kind of later on. The lever cap, this one here, that you just want to see that chunks aren't missing from this, huge chips aren't out of the corner. This one's kind of, I don't know whether it's chrome plated, but it's plated anyway. This is cast steel for the most part, and it's got a coating kind of over the top of it. So, and this one has been, like normally, I don't know, some of these, they're like the Stanley kind of here, there should be kind of a colour behind that, so maybe someone's done something to it, but I don't know for sure, but it's an okay kind of condition. When it comes to the plane, handles, when I've actually kind of already kind of done something to these handles, they were rosewood. The previous owner or person who used this actually took these off and sanded all of the finish off and put an oil on it. And that's fine, but they were really kind of, it was dull. When you put oil, depending whether it's Danish oil, your tung oil, all these different kind of oils, that you put them on there, and rosewood is a naturally oily wood, so it sometimes doesn't make it look really shiny. So what I did is I kind of, and I'll show you some images, I sanded this by disassembling it, of course. I sanded it and I put a French polish on it. French polish is an excellent finish that goes off really quickly and sticks to almost anything, you know, given a bit of reason. But it can stick to metal, it sticks to wood clearly, but also it's a sealer. So I kind of sanded it, sealed it with a French polish, and then waxed it afterwards. So, and it's given it a really nice kind of look. And I quite like French polish because it's a very traditional, and it's been around for, it's a finish that's been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, you know what I mean? It's well tested, you know, stood the test of time kind of way. So I kind of tarted those up. I kind of cleaned the screws up and all the rest of it. I'm going to keep the original paint kind of on here, and then after that I'm going to flatten the bottom and kind of all the rest of it, which I'll go through. But other things to watch out for is the underside, the sole of the plane. Like I said, I'll show you this one in a minute, which is very rusty. Things to watch out, you can have a tiny bit of rust, but if you have a huge amount of rust, or if you kind of inherit a plane, someone says, oh, do you want this? Do you want this? It's, you know, I know you're a woodworker, have this, and it's a pile of rust. Well, how much time do you need to invest into it? Are you going to invest 4 days into making it okay? Is the blade really rusty? Or it depends how much you value your time. I value my time, so, you know, I got one that didn't have any rust. There's no rust on the side. There's a bit of kind of something going on here, but it's not really that rusty. There's a few kind of marks, and there's some pitting kind of a little bit here. So it's not bad, you know what I mean? And I have checked the underside, which clearly you can't check. When you are looking on eBay, you can't tell whether this is flat or not, but you can tell whether someone's kind of hacked at it with sandpaper or something like that. So I could see it was a consistent kind of finish here. The mouth, which is this bit here, I could see that none of this was chipped or marked or anything. So they're the big ones to kind of look out for, I guess, when you're kind of looking at a plane. Yeah, in the pictures also, I think this bit is called the frog, this bit, and you can kind of, there's a couple of screws there, and you can undo those and detach the whole thing. So quite helpful in, if they do have it in the pictures on eBay, that it does show the whole thing kind of disassembled, or this bit kind of taken off, because it can be taken off quite easily. And I have taken this off and kind of cleaned it up, and I've adjusted them out. But again, I'll go through setup kind of another video. So things to kind of, I'm not going to go into like a full restoration kind of this, because there's lots of other YouTubers kind of doing that. I didn't want to, you know, go, oh, you can't, like, yeah, do a 40-minute video of me kind of sanding this or that, the kind of rest of it. So it's, yeah, I'll go through the kind of the major things you can do essentially, because most people know how to sand, or you can look at another video for kind of sanding tips and stuff. So mainly it was the French polishing and stuff I wanted to kind of, you know, hint at. That's quite a good one. Things that you can do, so if you have got one, or you've inherited a plane that is a bit rusty, what can you do to kind of A, prevent the rust in the future, or kind of actually kind of use it? So this one here, as you'll see underneath, is extremely rusty. This was a student who, actually no it wasn't, he did an internship with Mark Fish kind of next door. He's done a course with another school, and he's come here and he's renting a bench with us. So we do a bench rental scheme here. And he came in, this was actually not in a shed, this was in his, I don't know, like under his bed or kind of something like that. But he didn't realise that it would still get some moisture occasionally, and it did. The rest of it, you can see this is not rusty, that side's not rusty. Maybe it was a tiny bit damp when you put it away, or he put it on something that was mildly damp. So what you can do to kind of take the rust off, if it's been there for years, then it will kind of eat deeper in. And it's not to say it will never be flat again, but it will be pitted. So you've got to be very careful with things that rust like for a long, long period of time. So there's a couple of things you can do. The one we prefer, or the method we like the best, is this stuff here. This is called Gary Flex. So Gary Flex is kind of an abrasive block. I'll take the block out now. So they come in different grits, and I'll write it so you can kind of, see how it's kind of titled essentially. They're coming in different grits, and why it's really good is when you rub the rust, it's not like, because you could sand this with sandpaper, but this is kind of specially designed. This is kind of flexible. It's almost like a rubber, like a pencil or an eraser from America, I guess, American version of that. It's kind of slightly flexible, but it just eats the rust rather than, because you could just get sandpaper and hack away at this, but you might be like doming this over or adjusting this too much. So as you can see, this is pretty heavy rust here. You can see that kind of pile kind of collecting at the bottom. I'll be careful, I'm not going to go around the kind of blade area, but you can see it soon gets rid of the rust. So this is always the student uses this a lot, because lots of times when you are using hand planes and using specific timbers like oak and things, that you'll get, and if you have sweaty hands sometimes, that you'll get rust on the side of these. So this is just a preventative to kind of stop it rusting kind of anymore, because a tiny bit of rust here and there is not so bad. This one will clean up quite nicely. And then you could if you're putting it away and you're not using it for a couple of weeks, then camellia oil is quite a good thing to kind of spray on here, or other types of oil, because you put oil on the bare steel surface, especially if you're going to store this for many years. You want to take the blade out, you want to get oil all over this thing and then store it away. If it's going in your loft or garage, it needs to have kind of oil on it, because that will prevent water from kind of, or moisture sitting on the surface. So that's one way. That's the one I'd recommend, Gary Flex block. Or you could use a really aggressive, if there's lots of rust on something, then you could use like a wire brush attachment on a cordless drill. So that one's another really good one as well. So let's go back to this very slightly. So what I'm going to do in the kind of next sequence of videos in this kind of series, I guess, the series is this. We're going to get this one to work essentially, because I haven't tried it just yet. I have kind of tested how flat the blade is. I don't know if I'll show it a bit closer, that you put like a magic marker on the back of here, mark the back of your blade, and then you flatten it on a flat block. But again, I'll go through that in a lot more detail. I'll tell you, my tips and tricks and things like that on how to check whether these are flat, because you need to have a stone, whether it's a sharpening system, oil stones, water stones. I'll go through that as a sequence. That will be I'll have a lesson on that, and I've taught the students that, but I'll do a kind of a standalone kind of video on sharpening and then flattening the back of this. It could be flattening anything, a chisel. It's very different from flattening the underside of this. This is a huge area. Of course, this needs to be perfectly flat, but right at the very tip of the blade. This needs to be perfectly flat across here and across there. If it's not, and also things you need to have a straight edge, and you need to have somewhere flat to flatten this on, and you need to have some type of abrasive stuck to that flat object. So this one, if you're just working in your small workshop or something, if you've got a machine bed, then a machine bed should be flat. But if you haven't got a machine bed or anything, then I'll go through that in the video. You need some float glass or plate glass. You need to stick that to something, and you need to buy some sandpaper that needs to be stuck to the float glass, and you'll sand it. But again, this is something that I will go through in my video. I'll go through, because I'm going to flatten this one, and I'll record how I do it essentially, and I'll go through it. So, if you are planing timber, well, you need to have a straight edge, and a straight edge is going to check whether this thing is flat or not. It's not kind of good. This one here, it's got a bit of a wobble on it, so I know that it's going to need it's going to be a bit of material that we need taking off here, but it needs to be very precise. If someone handed me a plane and it was kind of bent like this, yeah, this one's wobbled kind of the other way, it doesn't matter how many years experience you have of making furniture, if this isn't flat, you can't make your piece of wood flat. It's impossible. If this is curved like this and you have a flat blade, you're going to get shaving out of here and shaving out of there. This thing is just no more than a paperweight. So it's extremely important that you don't just kind of buy a plane and then start using it and then say, I'm rubbish at hand planing, this is crap. Well, of course it is, but it's an understanding of what needs to be done to this. This can be tuned to be an amazing plane, but it needs to be flat first. So it kind of, whether it's got a bit of rust in it or what have you, that, yeah, it can be a really nice plane, but you need to go through these sequence of events. When you buy a brand new plane, well, you don't need to go through those, but then you're talking maybe £300, £400 for an equivalent, you know, like the Lee Nielsen, Veritas, you know, all the different kind of planes. You're spending a lot of money. And if you haven't got the budget for that, then you can buy a plane like this, but you just got to invest some time into it. So that's kind of why I was going through this kind of, yeah, this series, I guess. But I hope that's been helpful. Yeah, stick with this kind of series if you're interested in that. Yeah. All the kind of usual YouTube stuff, like write a comment if you've got any other questions about planes, you know, write a kind of comment down there. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up to date with the kind of sequence of videos. Yeah, thanks for dropping by.